Good morning and welcome to the TC Dojo. We're just about to get started with our presentation on where are they now. This is a bunch of stories from people we've interviewed over the last bunch of years. Since 2010 we've been reaching out to customers, talking to people. A lot of the stories we talked twice. We interviewed them in 2010 and things have changed, so we talk to them again now. We've got some old stories and some new ones. So, that's what we're going to talk about, because we always wonder. IBM, of course, developed DITA. They've been doing XML and HTML for a long time. Of course they can do it. They've got a big organization to depend on. They're a software company. They're a hardware company. They know about all of this stuff. But what makes anyone think that a small company like me can do it? I've got one writer or two writers or five writers, or I've only I've got hardware and I've got an IT department. But we don't do software. I don't have anybody who can build software for me to make a project like this work. How do we do it? Did it really work for anyone other than IBM? We've seen stories when they get started or when they believe it or from consultants, but what really happened to any of the others who have presented once or twice over the years? So let's talk a little bit about what you do and how you do it and sort of lessons learned that I learned from interviewing all of these people. And the first is that you invest in technology and you take it to the limit. This is the B-52 bomber. It has been around for 50 plus years. And at sometime in the recent past, it had its lifespan expanded another 40 years. By the time the product is done, we're talking a product that will have been around for nearly 100 years. And documentation and technology changes a lot over that kind of time. There was no frame maker 40 years ago. There was no Word at that point either. But those documents were written. They were published into paper. They were there for technicians to use. While the parts may have been swapped in and out, different part numbers, different products from different vendors, but the airplane is still being maintained. The documentation is still being maintained. It's still being updated. It's still being modified. It's still being published. So some products last a long time, and the ones that have, what have they done to make it work so well for so long? And how do they know they've reached that technology limit and it's time to get new technology? How do you know? Well, at one point in time, this was the biggest thing on the face of the earth. We had, first time ever, we had production that went well enough that we could all have automobiles. And it was a big change. It was a major technology shift. But so was this. This is the Taurus. And if you go to Wikipedia and read the story of the Taurus, it's actually kind of fascinating. It was a major technology shift of its own for reusable parts and reusable pieces and bringing things together, really standardizing things and improving production in a way that hadn't been thought of before prior to its release. Ford had done, they threw everything they knew out, started over, and they ended up with this, and it's changed manufacturing of cars since that time. And still we have the space shuttle. Sadly, a discontinued project at this point, but still this is reusable space vehicle, right? At one time we got to space, that was enough. No one ever thought we could use the same equipment over and over again, and yet here it is. So we know that reuse is significant. We know that it has benefit, and we know that if we can get to reusable pieces and components, or even migrate those components to new components that fit the same sockets, again, that we've achieved something major. So these are points at which we call those are fundamental change, and we know that these are if you can recognize these points, these are points where you say, it's time to buy a new technology. It's time to change what we do. It's time to start not from scratch, but to push things that we think we know, the traditional ways of thinking, and start fresh and look at something new and push it as far as we can. Because this is a time of fundamental change. We'll take a minute now talk about Robinson Crusoe, which, this is arguably one of the first novels ever written, ever. And novels are everywhere. We have, fiction and nonfiction. We have this is a major industry, and yet this is one of the oldest original published stories. Before this point, everything was nonfiction. There was no novel, and yet we have any number of renditions of audiences, of output types, of formats of this story. Video, comic, the future, the past, right? Robinson Crusoe on Mars. This is a story that continues to speak to us since it was written. And just because it's got a new format or a new output type or a new audience does not mean the story is over, right, or that it's reached its limit. We just need to figure out how to adapt it to the new requirements or to our new audience. Okay, so here's the key. The key to getting there is to understand what products or services you really offer, and then do that as well and expertly as possible. And by this I mean, I know FrameMaker the best. That is not it. It is, I am a writer, I know how to break things apart, I know how to explain them, I know how to write training for them, I know how to adapt to different users. This is what you do best, right? And you do it for a company who does a service or a product. And you want to leverage both of those things to make your company the best it can be. And you'll do it as expertly as you can. And it's because the most successful businesses for the century that we're in, and the next one, it'll turn out to be based on a competence and passion combination. And competence is in your skills, in your willingness to adapt, and your passion to achieve those things your company needs in order to survive. So, for our story today, all the customers we talked to were Arbortext customers. As an Arbortext partner, we were most interested in finding out whether the product they'd purchased had served them well or not. The Arbortext product is in a wide array of industries. We talked to some of the customers on this page, and we reached out to a whole lot more. And we really tried to push it around and not have too many products or too many customers in the same industry, just so that we could see really whether people who were not software had made it work. So let's start with some old customers. First, Medtronic. This is the main business unit up at headquarters in Minneapolis. They are a huge international corporation. Just as a company, they're huge. Every business unit is allowed to go their own way. Different business units have, they may have their business units of their own, like subdivisions. So at the time, HQ said, hey, they were first. They said, hey, we need to really achieve a quality level that we're not getting. The FDA is a big boogeyman to the medical device industry and to life science companies, and they can come in and they can shut your company down, costing millions of dollars and livelihoods and things like that. They can close companies. So they were really pushing hard to find a way to beat quality standards in their documentation, just like they do in their products, right? Because products are used in all of us. It's in individuals' houses. It's in surgical operating theaters. So there's requirements that have to be met for a certain quality level of those products in order to be used in humans or around humans. They wanted their documentation to have that same standard of quality and that same guarantee, right? And they knew that to do that, they would have to have a way of reusing content. They'd still have to be quick to market, or otherwise the executives would not fund this product. And they knew they needed to automate processes and drive the cost of creating documentation into the floor, right? This was the only way they were going to be able to pay for this kind of project. And so what they did was they actually were amazingly successful. I wrote a 5-part blog story about my interview with Greg Johnson. It's on the website, on the blog. I'll make sure to try and include that on postings after this. But their biggest thing was they actually hit 90% reuse, which is unbelievably high. And when they originally wrote up the ROI proposal for this project, they did all their calculations and they said, wow, these are really good numbers. The executive team is never going to believe us. They're never going to believe we can hit these numbers. So they reduced it and reduced it and reduced it and reduced it, right? Like almost by a factor of 10 to the point where they're like, yeah, they'll believe these, right? And by the time they finished, not only had they beat the numbers they gave to the executives, but they beat the ones they expected in the first place. This is what caused them to get 2 awards from the at the corporate level. One is the Star of Excellence, and the other is the Medtronic Star. Because in the end, the amount of money they saved by doing this project, by turning content into XML, by automating processes, by achieving extremely high amounts of reuse, they had achieved a higher ROI than if they had put that same money into a product that the company sells. This is unbelievable. This is outstanding. This is hardly achieved by anyone. And remember, they started in about 1999. We are closing in on almost 20 years. We're at 15, I think, for sure. So, really, they hit everything. And the biggest thing that they found was a success factor was getting reuse really high. And that found it directly proportional to the chunk size. And that translation cost was one of the biggest ones. So here we say that the translation cost went from 50 to 5 and is still going down. And you wonder, how do they get these numbers? At Medtronic, all of the business units are required to use the same translation company, which is in-house, right? So it's another business unit. And so he could track his numbers as more and more content moved into XML. He could track absolutely his cost of translation against the internal numbers that the other business unit, the translation business unit, had on their end. But at the same time, he could track the translation costs of other business units, right, who are not in XML. And as their content grew over time and as their, he could look at what their numbers really were and compare them to his own, which wasn't, his work wasn't decreasing either. So they're all working together. They all have more products. They all have new acquisitions. So he really had an apples-to-apples comparison of translation numbers. What's remaining in the $5 is graphics translation. And that's something he's trying to figure out. He knows he's going to hit a lower bound, and that's probably as far as it's going to go. But still, $5 a page, and this is per page, is extremely low. And a lot of that is due to having their content in XML. Next, so Medtronic started in 99, and one of the benefits they had was they had been trotted out by the sales team to Caterpillar, who had started almost 10 years earlier, in 1990. And Caterpillar had been at this for a while, so we're going to talk about them in 2 perspectives. First, let's talk about who they are. They have had equipment in the field for 80 years. They've got 300 products or more. They did their initial implementation in 1990. They have 230,000 users. We're not just talking about end users. We're talking about service centers and dealerships. And they've got, content worldwide, 53 languages, 42 million words. In 2010, they had 5,000 documents supporting 8,000 product configurations and 20 million hits a day for people looking at service information, right? So what they did was, let's talk in 2 first. The first step, their original implementation, was editor and publishing engine. And they, with that kind of volume of content, they really had to push down a way for clients to find the information. This was a big deal. They could not just search thousands and thousands of pages of documents, right? Because then you don't get your repair done for days, potentially, because you're looking and looking and looking for stuff. And not every client had a high-speed network. We may have dealers in the middle of the tundra who really, they don't, right? They're not at a T1 right next to the Colo facility. So, what do you do for those people too? You really have to push things down. So the original implementation was to get all of the typical things that you get: automated publishing, different formats, online and offline, syncing your content, getting it automated formatting and automating some processes and pulling all of that stuff down and getting high reuse. Because of all of those successes that they'd already had, now, almost 20 years later, they are looking at things, well, 25 years later, right? They're looking at things that say, you know, what do we do now? We've got all this content in XML. How do we make it better so that our customers can work, right? And the thing they're doing now is called the Service Information Center. This is an Arbortext product. It allows customers to come at things visually on a mobile device. And this means, you know, you've got like a picture of the tractor, and you can sort of navigate your way visually like you would if you had it in front of you. Move the arm, push this around, open up the casings, and find the piece that you're trying to fix. And when you get to that, all of the associated documentation with that piece has been going along with you along the way, telling you how to get to that point, different procedures for opening the coupling, opening the engine, or whatever, right? And when you get to that point, the content that is associated with maintenance of that part is right there at your fingertips. So they're able to do a whole bunch of new stuff because their content's already in XML. They started talking about this. They started the project in, I want to say, 2011. They're still doing it. A lot of these people who are talking about early on, they are going to be presenting again over the next bunch of years. And if you have a chance to go to a conference, keep an eye out and make sure you go take a look. Here's one, different life science company, whose name I'm not allowed to give out. They told me if you do so, I will come after you and with the big scary way. So we don't talk about who they are. We can talk about what they did. They're a large international corporation with very complex products. They are life science. This can be any number of things, med device, pharmaceutical, medical, all kinds of options there. And the reason they don't talk about what they've done is because they believe that what they have done gives them a significant advantage over their competitors. And early on, when they first started doing this, they did present in a couple of places. But, you know, it was always, he said, you know, after presentations, it was always, you know, the competitors would come up and say, how'd you do that? How do we do that? Right? And he doesn't want to let them have the edge that he has. So he kind of stopped doing that. But he was very willing to talk to us as long as we remained confidential about who it was. Their biggest thing was they wanted content libraries and the ability to populate change really quickly and improve their delivery times. They really, really needed to be as efficient as possible, and they needed workflow to shove things along to avoid delays. They picked Arbortext Editor, Publishing Engine, and Documentum. They call it bottled gold because it does give them an advantage, a significant advantage over their competitors. Their volume is in the high thousands of docs, and they have a lot of reused content. And their biggest thing is when something changes, they can republish everything without a human being touching it. Say, for example, you've got a company who is getting communications from physicians, right? And the physician has questions about your device or your medication or a procedure to do with one of those two things. And it's not in the official documentation that they're allowed to publish with the FDA. They write your company a letter. You want to respond quickly, and you want the information to be accurate and consistent. And if some other doctor writes to you, they get the same information, right? So they can do all of this and not have to, and they can do it very quickly. And that speed is a big deal because there's a human life potentially at the other end of the chain, right? We're talking life science companies. So, you know, here's the situation then. They have 60 users and 5 support staff. They are extremely satisfied with what they picked to work. It is still working like a top. And they're looking at things they can do like Caterpillar is. Now that I've got all this content in XML, what other things can I do with it? Can I improve my customer relationship database? Can I, you know, do faster FDA trials? Can I, you know, what else can I do now that I have all this information here? And that's really cool to see. This is an old product. I don't have a date for this, but it dates to the 90s for sure. This is they've been around a long time, and it's been a long time. It was kind of one of the first ones I talked to. Okay, different heavy equipment. Let's go back to manufacturing. Deere. John Deere is a major equipment manufacturer. Their biggest complex story was that they had authors that were kind of outside their control. And by this I mean their authoring team was at corporate, but it was also in all the little dealerships and service centers all around the world, right? Because not only do they want to publish corporate communications to your local region, but they want the dealer in that region to add their own information to, say, the newsletter, their own tips, their own offers, their own special things, so that their customers keep coming back and they do their service with them and they're happy, right? We've got a huge change in user experience now, but they were thinking about this even in 2004. So they've got this what's called mixed content creation stream, and you have different technology available all over the place, right? Your little dealer in, say, Nebraska may not have enough to do a whole XML publishing system all on their own, right? But they do have something else. Who knows what they have? Maybe they've got WordPerfect. Maybe they've got Peach Text. Because they've got a really old system. Who knows? But they still had to be able to support those people coming in and bringing stuff to that table of customer communication. So they had lots and lots of tool sets and lots of suppliers of content. They brought all those repositories down into one. They had all kinds of different translation processes. Everybody was all over the place. They brought 35 translation management systems down to one. They started multi-channel publishing. And when I tried to reach them first time in 2010, their system was working so well, no one was left. And by that I mean sometime they had started originally in 2000, and it was like the system was running like a rock. It required no maintenance. It wasn't going anywhere. Everything was working. And they offered a lot of the team early retirement, and they all took it. And the system was still running. Then, inspired by the success of a lot of other people who had been doing XML for a long time, back in 2012 they started hiring again. And they're looking to do new things with the content that has been in XML for such a long time. Just like Caterpillar and the Service Information Center. And what I'm showing you here are the results they had as of 2004, because they're starting new work now. And even in 2004, they had a major reduction in freeze date time. How long does the content have to sit before everything's synchronized and you can publish? How much is translation? They'd had a 50% reduction just in that. And they were delivering 3 million pages with 3 million graphics in 33 languages and 35 down from 35 translation management systems. They really were able to achieve more for less, obviously, because they let most of the team retire. And that's a really big deal. Publishing house. This one is a failure. Harcourt in Florida, they are a publishing house, like books. And sometime during when the project was working, about a year or so, year and a half into the project, there was an executive shakeup and a major amount of layoffs when they got merged into Houghton Mifflin, headquartered in Ireland. At the time, most of the technology people who had been involved in the project they left, and no one I could reach knows whether the implementation ever got completed. It's a lesson for all of us. Just because you make a lot of headway, just because you're doing something good, doesn't mean that when the business changes, you'll have the opportunity to get where you want to go. And it happens. This one, Financial Publishing House, is another one where the book, the published item, is the product they deliver to their customers. It's not an add-on to a product. This is a financial publishing house. This means they produce things like IPO documents, annual reports coming out of Wall Street, lots of tables, sometimes multi-page tables. And their biggest challenge was that when they had edits from the clients, their turnaround time was just continuing to extend and ruining, kind of ruining their profit margin. And they really wanted to get it to a point where things could manage themselves. Their other thing was not all their source content was XML, or was it ever going to be, right? Because you're getting financial data from companies, and it's coming from all kinds of systems. So what do you do? So they ended up with Arbortext Advanced Print Publisher, formerly 3B2, and they started in 2003. They've achieved page-level granularity. They do page proofs, even though their result is an electronic format that has XML and other things underneath. Every job can be customized with generic all-purpose tools. They have WYSIWYG document comparison, which is kind of unheard of for XML content, or seemingly unheard of. And at the time I spoke to them in 2010, they were looking at formatted document with formatting codes side by side. They could adjust things if they had to. They could fix it, and it would still publish automatically. They had huge improvements in productivity and accuracy, and especially that page turnaround time, all while their staff was being reduced and their training cycle was as well. That's a pretty big thing to achieve. Network equipment, we're talking about Juniper networks. I did the initial implementation in 2000. I wouldn't recognize where they are today. They've done some amazing things since and are actually pushing the boundaries of cutting-edge technology and implementation of output formats than even IBM themselves. Their big thing at the time, in the start, was that they had reuse within a book, across a set of books, and across a simultaneously existing releases. So at least 3 dimensions of reuse. And they really knew they had to have content libraries. I wrote a paper on this at SIGDoc 2003, and I'm sure it's still available from ACM as well as on our website. They picked Arbortext Editor, Publishing Engine, and Interwoven at the time. In around the 2005-2006 timeframe, they moved from a custom DITA-ish doc type to DITA, to standard DITA. The big deal was that at the time, they had reduced 1 week publishing to overnight publishing. It used to take a week and 2 production people to get through all of the books and make sure it was ready for the release. And, to bring that down to an overnight process was a huge cost savings. Their big thing was that they used to estimate a TechPubs person costing $20,000 a month. You're looking at 2 people for a week, so half a month, $10,000. For every release, there were 5 or 6 per year. You're talking $60,000 or so dollars, which is maybe a salary for a TechPubs person, which is, that's significant just to reduce the production time. Not to mention what other things they were, editing time and authoring time and anything else that you were achieving. We're just talking about production. Since then, they've moved to topic-based authoring. All their BUs are now in XML, and their team produces 50% of all of the content on Juniper.net, which is a huge thing. Their big things, they now have consistent content, consistent look and feel across business units, and they have 1 content repository. And they've got 8 people supporting the entire company's technical publications teams. Those 8 people are about 6 to 7% of the TechPubs overall. They're looking at doing customized content in dynamic books. There's two video podcast things available on Juniper's implementation. One is a podcast I did with Rajal that's on our podcast site, and one is a video presentation they did to the SF Bay Arbortext PTC user group. And he sort of shows you what they've done since and where they're going. It's kind of neat. So come to the website for that. Here's one, telecom equipment company. I don't have much to say about the company because either they were kind of on their way out. They were almost gone, I think, by the time I talked to them. They had an SGML implementation, started in the 90s and failed. It just kind of didn't work out. But by the time they tried again, they had a huge need for distributed, global writing team that the content was available for 7x24. So one of the things they had acquired a lot of companies and grown pretty big at one time, and they merged all of those technical publications teams into one business unit, and they pushed to increase the reuse because that was how the design teams worked. And so they wrote their business case that way too because that's what the executives understood. And so they tied their technical publications directly to how the products were built. And so if the design teams had 20% reuse, documentation could get 20% reuse, and they could compare those numbers. It's a good way to go at it if you're struggling for where you're going to go. They picked Arbortext also. They had originally a team of 6 to 8 staff supporting the implementation, and there were 600 or 700 writers they were supporting. When I talked to him in 2010, they had 1 staff member supporting 240 writers, and they were still getting everything out the door that the other 700 had once done. They had started with a proprietary DTD. It was very DITA-like when they kind of how it ended up being designed. And one of the things that's really interesting is he says the system is running today like a Cadillac. Ultimately, it's humming right along. And by this he means he hasn't touched the system in years. He hasn't had to upgrade it, maintain it, change it, tweak style sheets, because it works all the time, every time, guaranteed, which was really cool to hear. That seems to be a common theme with Arbortext, long-term Arbortext products. And the other thing that's important is because of the way they had all of these efficiencies, and they were achieving reuse, and they were publishing quickly, and they didn't have a lot of staff supporting it, it was just running all on its own. When it came time that they were selling off divisions and they are looking to be acquired themselves, all of that made them a much more attractive company to the acquiring companies. And acquisitions are a really tough time, and they're very stressful. You never know whether you're going to be seen as redundant or okay, but if you've done something that's impressive and makes you an attractive part of the attraction for that purchase, you're pretty much guaranteed to stay. And that's really, really cool. He said that when the acquiring targets come looking at them, they see what they've done and are very, very envious. And he attributes all of it to the fact that they went to XML in 2004. Almost 10 years. So let's talk about some new ones, have some fun. Ingersoll Rand, Club Car, the very similar story to what you see at Caterpillar, what you saw at Deere, right? Because they've got a dealer network, they've got multiple languages, multiple countries, they've got operator manuals, service illustrated parts catalogs, they've got sales collateral that they managed to fold into this solution. They are in the middle of their years. They are expecting a reduction of 92,000 the first year and 500 in the first 3. Already they have reduced their publishing life cycle from 25 days to 5. Right? Remember we talked about the cost of TechBob's personnel, and when if you maybe freeze all the content for that 25 days, your whole team is sitting around not doing anything, right? Or they're starting the next project, but they can't, touch the files, and that can be extremely costly. But now their other big thing was that they are able to produce online publication for the first time, which is really cool. Porsche, similar situation, right? Because we've got dealer networks, we've got a lot of maintenance technicians, we've got mechanics worldwide, we've got dealerships worldwide. We want to make sure everybody's happy, and because we produce an expensive product, we want to make sure our end customers are really happy. That means we need to make our service technicians and our dealerships as efficient and accurate and perfect as possible, right? So their big thing was to make sure that they provided accurate, in-sync information to everyone in every language and every format, and that repairs could be done in the shortest amount of time possible. They unified all kinds of different authoring and delivery processes into one. They got the service errors down, they increased productivity, user experience is better, all because they reduced manual labor and unified processes and reduced costs associated with content and creation and delivery. ZTE 85 was when they were founded. They're China's telecommunication manufacturer. They're pretty big, but they're still, 85, they're still really pushing their way, and they want to stay on top. Their big drivers were time to market. It's a huge one. Get that stuff out fast. Make sure the quality is high, and make sure that we've got content based on what the customer actually bought and how they configured it. They got an interesting side benefit that sort of comes whenever you do these kind of projects. You don't normally see it spoken about, but that's change and configuration management processes improvement. They really managed to unify how authors collaborate. They managed to improve the publication process and get that sort of process authoring and change management sort of nailed down for a group that is usually doesn't have a formal method for that beyond save the file to the server and then hand it to somebody else, tell them you're done. And so they got all of that, plus they got the usual stuff, formatting and delivery automation. They got, reusable components and all of that kind of stuff, in addition to change and configuration management. This is the American College. They're a college, obviously. They've been around for 80 years. They do training for financial services professionals. They publish 90 courses. 30 or 40 of them are published on a quarterly schedule. And along with the courseware, there are 20 books of different types, and they've got 50 people authoring in DITA. Their big drivers were to keep their web content synchronized. They had a huge delay between when the web content was available and when the printed copy was available for students. And, they wanted to make sure that that was not just available at the same time, but that it was consistent in its information presentation. There weren't differences and errors between them because they'd been published at different times. And they wanted to make sure that their customers were getting that consistent, accurate, timely information. And they wanted it fast. As soon as the course started, it had to be ready. And the one that's at the bottom here is kind of important too. They're looking at future product positioning, right? This is courseware. You've got students. You may have them all around the world. You may have electronic-only students. E-books are kind of important. The solution they had was Arbortext DITA with an integrated authoring with CMS. They reduced editing from 1 to 2 months to 1 to 2 weeks. That's directly resulted from copy and paste into referencing content. Also, they reduced editorial review from 1 month to 3 days. And the combination process of composition, doing production, and review of that finally produced work went from 3 months to 4 to 7 days. Right, we're talking huge cost savings here. And because of all of these savings, they were able to generate $144,000 of new business because of these savings, because things were ready faster, quicker, and they were available at the same time. And most of that's in their first 12 months, and they're still doing things. This project is still in progress. Toro. Toro's a great story. Oh my gosh, I love them. They were a panelist on, as was the telecom story I told earlier, on a panelist on our webinar a couple of years ago called ROI of XML. Andy Piper from Toro talked about what they were doing and what they got as a result. They create outdoor power equipment for creation and maintenance of landscapes. 65% of their customers are commercial, so they're residential people who have their products too. It's a lot of customers of a lot of different skill sets available all over the world. One of their biggest drivers was to eliminate process friction. Keep wanting to say fiction. Friction. And that's stuff like avoiding automating manual processes, avoiding things that cause wait time, anything that causes duplicate work or impedes communication or causes interoperability between systems or things like that, data storage that is conflicting. These are the kinds of things we talk about when we talk about process friction. And so this is kind of what they were looking at in addition to all of the standards things, right? Because they still wanted high reuse, they still wanted automated publishing, they still wanted, lower cost for translation. So in addition to all of this, these process friction things were one of their big deals. They ended up with Arbortext, almost the entire suite, plus Arbortext PDM Link, which is a content management system with master parts author. That's something that interacts with engineering systems and engineering CAD programs like Pro-E or Creo, AutoCAD, those kinds of things. And they had made pretty significant savings. You can see here on the slide. They've been at this for a while. At the time we did the ROI of XML webinar, Andy had just got an award from corporate because they had a situation where all of their docs in 25 languages for a brand new product was ready before the product even hit the loading dock. That's almost unheard of. Documentation almost always lags behind product production, and they beat it. And everything was still accurate and on target with the capabilities of the product. And that's a huge deal. That means their release of the product in all of those countries could be simultaneous, and they could do massive marketing all at the same time. There's no delay of it going to Germany and the German market because we're waiting for that translation of the documentation to come in. It was a big, big deal. And he talks a little bit more about it on the webinar. So one more time, I'm going to come back to Medtronic. This is a different business unit than the one I started with. But they had seen what the other business units had done, and they wanted to do it too. Right? Remember I said every business unit is autonomous and able to do what they want. And this one had a fairly complex situation. They had a lot of little subdivisions that had been given to their business unit over the years. That meant that they had a lot of different styles and not much standard between the different groups. It all depended on who wrote what piece of content at what time as to what it looked like. And when you had a bunch of little companies all doing this, it was kind of a mess. So their two big things were all the usual stuff, plus they did not want to do any tool building. And their other thing was they wanted to be able to do their own maintenance going forward. They did not want to have to go back to the consultants who developed their system in order to make changes. They picked editor, publishing engine, and content manager. And they'd had the chance to learn from the other business units. Right? They were kind of in a golden position. They could learn from what everyone else did. And they decided not to reinvent the wheel. They applied standards, very little customization. They did one specialization that was an FDA regulatory thing, or at least would help with that. They kind of went outside the box to find an inside the box tool. And that means they implemented Arbortext out of the box with very little changes. They did not do a lot of customization. They did not do a lot of monkeying so that they can upgrade and go forward with very little effort and take advantage of new features. The big thing was they decided on a guided implementation rather than your typical consulting project. They invested in themselves with the help of a mentor rather than the consultants. And their cost was drastically lower than your typical implementation. I think Sarah over at Scriptorium did a presentation a couple of years at LavaCon, and she said the average cost is $167,000 to do DITA. The Medtronic services cost outside of software was, I think, 42, more than about a quarter of your average cost. And they are able to do maintenance on their own without having to have consultants do it. One of the things, and part of what helped them get to this point was they decided to change their culture, right? That reduced the battles for real estate, getting rid of document dictators because they were changing the way they were looking at things. They invested in their staff to gain new skills and do new learning. They took lessons from library science and change management to really apply the best practices to what they were doing and help their staff grow. I mean, they really, really, really invested in themselves, and it's becoming very successful for them. All right, we'll wait for questions while you guys type them in, and while we wait, I'll tell you about what's coming up. The next TC Dojo open session is Discovering the Hidden Treasure of Dynamic Product Information. This is how to talk to the C-suite, how to convince them that doing this kind of project is worthwhile. Hearing stories like the ones we talked today will help that because you see what cases other people made. But ultimately, you've got to make the case that's applied to your business. So you kind of need to understand how the C-suite thinks, and you need to know how to communicate the value of technical publications to people who may only think it's just, a requirement, so we spend that money. Okay, great. How do I spend less? Right? You need to show them how TechPubs is valuable and where it provides its value and how to get even more out of it. Also, the next TC Dojo Arbortext session is next week. It's creating your page set in 30 minutes or less. This is just the basics of page sets and how to get them started and understanding how they work and what pages are and how you make things happen. And that's what we're going to do in the Arbortext Dojo edition. These sessions are recorded but not available to the public. Arbortext Dojo sessions are only available to members of the Master Series. Speaking of the Master Series, our next Master Series session is Monday, September 23rd. And the Master Series is a different kind of webinar. It is more of a group conversation, kind of like group therapy for XML. It lets you talk to the same people every week. So you're speaking in an environment of confidence and trust. And you can talk about real problems that you're having today. It is not run by us. It is run by the attendees. And it's been really, really amazing the last bunch of weeks. So I hope you join us. All right. And before we get to the questions, we will see you next time. And don't forget to vote on your choice for upcoming session topics. All right. I'm going to save the recording, and we'll handle questions. I don't see too many. All right. Thank you. Bye.